This morning, I woke up seeing this post here on X, which mentions that Anthropic seemingly pulled the Claude code plug from the Pro plan. So that you need the more expensive subscription plans in order to be able to use Claude Code or use your subscription in Claude Code. Now, Anthropic was quick to comment on this, mentioning that this is just a small test they're running on only 2% of new prosumer signups. I find it kind of weird to run this kind of test, and I also think that Anthropic could have seen what was coming their way when running a test like this, the impact a test like this would have on their image and what people would think, because of course, clearly this kind of fits the narrative or what we're already seeing, where we're getting less usage out of our subscriptions. We see stronger limits or stricter limits. We see degrading model performance, as it seems all these things were happening over the last couple of weeks. I mean, Anthropic aggressively cracked down the usage of their subscription outside of Claude Code. If you wanted to use it with OpenClaw, for example, they cracked down on that. So that all kind of gives us a clear, bigger picture. And what kind of fits that picture or narrative is this news article GitHub published a couple of days ago, where they made it clear that they would pause new signups for the GitHub Copilot Pro, Pro Plus, and student plans, and that they are tightening usage limits for individual plans. And most importantly, that the Opus models are no longer available in the Pro plans. And that, of course, all kind of makes sense, but we have to dive a bit deeper into the economics of what's going on to understand why this is happening and, most importantly, what this means for us also in the future. It clearly means that the days of unlimited usage and heavy subsidies are over. And to understand this, we have to understand the economics of these subscriptions and of token usage, you could say, or token consumption. Because, of course, these subscription models offered by Anthropic, by OpenAI, by GitHub, they really only work if the majority of users are not really using up all the available usage they have, right? That's pretty much the case for any subscription offering out there, not just for these AI subscriptions. If you have a Netflix subscription and you spend 24/7 watching Netflix, you will probably very likely not be a super profitable customer for them. But most people don't do that, and that is how these companies can make a profit. That's true for all subscriptions, obviously. Now we can see the true price, or a price that's closer to the true price of our AI requests if we take a look at the API pricing pages of these companies. There, for example, we can see that the latest model by Anthropic, Claude Opus 4.7, has an input token price of $5 per million tokens and an output token price of $25 per million tokens. And we can put that in relation to other models they have. We can, of course, also put it into relation to what OpenAI has to offer, for example. There we see that GPT 5.4, which most Codex users are probably using right now, has an input price of $2.50 per million tokens. So only half of what we had for Opus 4.7. And that we have an output price of $22.50. So a bit less than what we saw for Opus. Now, it's probably fair to assume that these API prices are prices that leave these companies at a break-even point or a small profit regarding their cross margin. So if we just look at the inference cost specifically, we can probably assume that they will turn a profit if you use their APIs. Now, of course, for that, it's important to understand that the cost of running AI models does in the end depend on two main factors. It is the training of the AI models that costs money, and it's the inference, of course. So we have these two factors here that come into play for these AI companies. Now, of course, the training cost is a one-time thing, right? So you train a model once and that is super expensive, but obviously it's a one-time thing. Of course, these companies then train more and more models and it's a new one-time cost for each model. But once a model was trained, it's no longer occurring any training cost, except maybe for further fine-tuning runs or derived models from that base model. But yeah, the big chunk of cost is only occurred once. Now, for inference, naturally, that's different. This is an ongoing cost. It's per request in the end, because of course, inference is the process of producing the concrete output for your prompt, for your task that you send to a model provider. And inference is, of course, what's happening all the time when you're using Claude Code, when you're using Codex, but also, of course, when you send a prompt on ChatGPT or in any other way. Now, this, of course, is where you want to be at least break even with your API pricing, because otherwise it means that you lose money on every request you receive. And whilst you could, of course, be doing that to grow your market share, and whilst I wouldn't rule out that companies are occasionally doing that, doing it long term, of course, will not be viable because you'll go out of business. Now, naturally, you also need to earn your training cost at some point. So ideally, these incoming requests your users are sending to you give you enough of a gross margin on your inference cost so that that margin also covers your training cost, your staff cost, and so on. So of course, that's the economics of how you can run and use these AI models. Now, as mentioned, the API pricing is probably the part where these companies are not losing massive amounts of money, but of course, as a consumer, as a customer, you do. If you were to power Claude Code with these on-demand prices of Opus, you would be paying way, way more than if you were using their subscriptions. Because of course, with the Max subscription, for example, for only $200, you're getting lots of usage out of this plan. You'll get many millions of tokens out of this plan. And if you take a look at what output tokens would normally cost you per million tokens, you can see that normally, if you ignore the input tokens, which you shouldn't, but if you ignore them, for these $200 here, we should not even get 10 million output tokens, right? Because 1 million costs us $25, so we should only get 8 million output tokens. And then if we consider input tokens, it would be less than that. And clearly, if you had any long-running sessions, if you've been using Claude Code, for example, for a week, you tracked your token usage, you'll see that you can go above that limit, and you definitely could in the past. And that makes it obvious why the companies are kind of trying to limit how much usage you can get out of your subscriptions, and why I think we'll see higher subscription prices definitely in the future, maybe already in the near future. Now, of course, it's not super easy for these companies to increase their prices though, because market share. Obviously, all these companies want to aggressively capture market share. The reasoning being that if you're the main company that's established as the coding agent provider in lots of enterprises out there, in lots of companies out there, they will probably pay higher subscription prices in the future. So you don't want to start increasing your prices too early, because that could drive some of your customers to your competition, which you don't want, of course. On the other hand, you don't want to go broke. I mean, for example, OpenAI recently raised $122 billion to accelerate the next phase of AI. And you could read that this would only give them around 18 months of a runway. So 18 months until they need to raise again. So clearly, you can't continue subsidizing all that usage forever, because if you go out of business, then all your customers are going to your competition anyway. So there is a trade-off here, and that's of course exactly the difficult spot these companies are facing right now. That's the economics here. Now, of course, as you probably read and also felt if you're a gamer, for example, we're at a point in time where, because of all the AI stuff that's happening, we're facing a big compute scarcity and crisis and high prices for memory and everything related to what these AI models and these AI data centers need. So memory is expensive because inference needs lots of memory. If you tried running models locally on your system, you know you need lots of memory for that. So the memory prices went up. But it's not just memory, it's also networking gear, because of course you're running both the training and the inference, not on one single chip, but on huge racks and clusters of chips, and all these clusters need connections between the clusters, between the chips, so that you can build super GPUs, so to say. And this networking gear is in high demand and therefore expensive. And then, of course, we also have energy and data centers. We need both. We need data centers to put those chips, and that's why lots of construction is happening there. But then these data centers, they need energy, right? And you heard about that too. Energy is another big problem. You can't get it from the grid. It's simply not built for that. There isn't enough energy available there. That's why all these new data centers are moving to off-grid solutions, so where the energy is produced next to the data center with gas turbines or nuclear power. But that, of course, all takes time, and it also takes components, and there isn't an endless amount of companies that can build these power plants. There isn't an endless amount of components that are needed for building these power plants, so that's all limiting the amount of compute that can go online, which in turn is missing for the inference and of course also for the training. Now historically, and with that I mean only like 1 or 2 years ago, the incentive for these companies was to dedicate a lot of compute resources towards training, because that gives you better models, which lets you stay ahead or get ahead in the AI race. And that incentive still exists. But of course, nowadays, there also is a bigger incentive and higher importance here on the inference part, because it's the inference part that gives you customers, that gives you visibility in the market. Because if nobody can use your models, then it's great that you have good models, but you're not gaining any market share. So you need inference. That has become way more important. So companies have to split the scarce compute resources and data center capacities between these two ends. And of course, especially since the beginning of this year, we're also seeing changed usage behavior of customers. The GitHub news article here actually is pretty open about this. Agentic workflows have fundamentally changed Copilot's compute demands. Long-running parallelized sessions now regularly consume far more resources than the original plan structure was built to support. And it's the same, of course, for Anthropic and OpenAI. In the past, and again, this only means like a year ago or so, these companies, not primarily, but to a huge extent, really only focused on occasional chat sessions. A user, a customer would occasionally come on and ask ChatGPT or Claude a question. And of course, that could have been multiple times a day, but it was just a couple of questions, just a couple of answers, a couple of follow-up questions. Of course, way less tokens than all these long-running agentic workflows and coding sessions have. In those coding sessions, or whichever agentic workflows you're running, you're burning through hundreds of thousands and millions of tokens quickly, very quickly. Far quicker than you could with just your occasional chat session. Now, given the fact that all these modern models we're dealing with are thinking models, typically, the token amount also got higher compared to a year or two ago, because a response simply takes more tokens due to that thinking process, which of course are still tokens, even if you don't see them in the final response maybe. So therefore, the amount of tokens consumed got way, way bigger now than it was a year or two ago. Again, bringing us to the point that inference is becoming more important, because you need way more inference to handle all that token generation that is going on. And that's the reason why all these new models are pretty expensive when used through the API, but even more importantly, why these subscriptions are so difficult for these companies right now. They introduced those subscriptions in the past when there were way less tokens being consumed, and now they're at a point where for the same subscription price, people are now using way more tokens. That's the difficulty. Now, especially for Anthropic, for example, I could imagine they are feeling the pain a bit more than OpenAI, not just because their models seem to be more expensive to run if you just take a look at the API pricing, but also, of course, because historically, even a year ago already, Anthropic had more enterprise and business customers, which is good for them to some extent. It's a stable revenue base, and ChatGPT or OpenAI has been more consumer based. They had more normal people, normal consumers as customers, and now they're also moving more towards business. But historically, because they had the ChatGPT moment, they had more normal people as customers. The disadvantage for Anthropic now, of course, is that these business customers are exactly the customers that are running these agentic workflows, or that tend to run these agentic workflows. I mean, your mom and dad, if they're paying for ChatGPT at all, which they likely don't, they are not running agentic workflows, but you are, your company is, and that, of course, makes the subscription even more difficult for Anthropic, I would imagine, than for OpenAI, where there still are plenty of normies in the subscription. I would guess. Still, they're definitely feeling the pain as well. And what does this all mean now? What do changes like this, or changes like in this X post where Anthropic is running tests to pull Claude code from the cheaper plans, what does this all mean for us? I think it's pretty obvious. We'll see even stricter limits in the future, and therefore we of course might reach a point where the subscriptions don't really feel like they're worth it anymore. And I think that will be the point where we'll see higher prices. It's not unreasonable, I think, to believe that these coding subscriptions, or generally these agentic usage subscriptions, will cost many $1,000s a month at some point. Not this year, most likely, but at some point, because of course, companies may start comparing the cost of these subscriptions against the cost of employees. Yeah, and that's of course not great news, and it may be totally wrong, but it is definitely what I think will happen. And of course, when you make that comparison, there's a lot of room for these subscriptions to get way, way more expensive. Obviously, the subscriptions then won't be for the normal people anymore, so I think we'll also see new subscription offerings for them, which simply have way stricter usage limits, which are enough for ChatGPT, but not enough for agentic workflows. But for the professional use, for the agentic workflows, we'll see stricter limits and higher prices. I'm not sure when, because, market share, right? So what I mentioned before, but eventually we'll see that. Because ultimately, as mentioned, OpenAI has around 18 months of runway. They probably want to stay in the business. Same for Anthropic. And therefore, that is what I think we'll see here in a year or so. I don't know.